Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And, you know, when I first booked this interview, our intent was to talk about a lawsuit the state of North Dakota has been joined under the leadership of Attorney General Drew Wrigley against Meta. Meta is Facebook. They changed their name not that long ago, but it's Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, and it's about social media and the deleterious effects it's having on America, although this lawsuit specifically is about young Americans, minors. We were going to talk about all that, but then in between when I booked the interview and now when we're recording it, former North Dakota State Senator Ray Holmberg was indicted. I think a lot of people saw it coming based on some of the excellent reporting by our April Baumgarten, who is way out in front on some of the connections between former Senator Holmberg and a gentleman that's was arrested and accused of child pornography. Now Holmberg is charged with traveling internationally to procure sex with minors and also possessing and I suppose soliciting child pornography. And we're all watching this. We're all in shock. There are political reverberations, I should say. And it's all really ugly. And Drew, I mean, that's, even though that's not why we invited you on to talk, it is the headlines right now. And there was my first question. I wanted to ask you something because your office sent out a press release, and I'm going to quote from it because something jumped out at me and I wanted to see if we could kind of read between the lines here. It says, your press release, in early February 2022, within hours of my taking the oath of office as Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the leadership of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, that's the North Dakota branch that's under your office, briefed me on the early stages of this joint federal and state investigation. I immediately instructed the BCI to move this case to priority status where it remains today due to the ongoing of this nature of this investigation. Now that, to me, I looked at that and immediately two questions jumped to my mind. One, why wasn't this a priority previously? I mean, seems like such an egregious case against a powerful political figure. Do you feel like it was being given all the attention it deserved prior to you taking office? And the second part of the question is, did your predecessor, Wayne Stenehjem, who is a Grand Forks Republican, obviously knew Ray Holmberg, was political allies with Ray Holmberg for a long time, had he recused himself from the case?
He had not recused himself from the case. I had a discussion with his chief deputy about that, to clarify that he had not recused himself from the case. And the reason there's a backlog of unfortunately, there's a backlog of these types of cases in all cases, and things they just go into the queue and they get handled as they come along. Evidence seized pursuant to search warrants or pursuant to an arrest or what have you, and it goes into the queue. And unless the oversight in my oversight as Attorney General and my predecessor, the same thing, unless you sort of intercede and say there's a reason we should reprioritize this matter, it has to stay in the queue. I mean, for obvious reasons, the cases are coming in, you got to move them along. And what I had learned is there had been a really important event that had taken place in November in this case. And as you may recall, I took office on the 9th of February. So some months had gone by. And when I was briefed on it in the initial hours, literally in the initial hours, the U.S. Attorney's Office called and said, we have something we need to talk to you about immediately. And then I asked the BCI to come to the office and tell me about our role in it. What I learned was that it was just the case. It remained in the queue. It was, these months had gone by since some evidence had been obtained and it hadn't been analyzed or dealt with. I had some reasons why it needed to go into priority status. I drove personally to Fargo the next day, I believe it was a couple days, and I met with the team of BCI agents that were working on it, that have the evidence in question at that time. Again, this was the initial part of the investigation, and I told them in no uncertain terms this was a top priority matter. For the following reasons, and it was not that, oh, this is a political person that makes it a top priority. No, it was some things that I knew just about some of the people involved. I just said it's really important that we get moving on this, and I can tell you within, and they said, sure. I mean, of course, yes, we will. We'll get right to that, and they did. And within 3 days, they were the BCI forensic investigators were on the phone to me saying, I'll just keep it really brief. They said he kept everything, and they had gotten into
that's Holmberg had kept everything.
That was the comment, was just that we got in there, and I mean they were able to, upon it getting given top priority status. They were able to get into the phone, and they had found, they were in the initial stages of evidence gathering had begun robustly. I'll put it that way.
Do you think that your predecessor should have recused himself from that case?
It is incumbent upon us to evaluate, and everybody has to make their own assessment in that. There were such close friendships there, and I don't know what the reasons are. His deputy couldn't give me one. I don't know what the reason is, and I'm not going to step in that role. But it's a routine matter, by the way, to recuse. As U.S. attorney, I had to recuse myself from time to time, either because, for two reasons. One, you have to do it sometimes because it's just the appearance of things. It might not look right for you to be the overseeing leader of an investigation, and sometimes there's an actual matter. I had a matter once. I recused myself. A relative of mine was a witness. Would have been a witness had this case been brought forward, and would have been a witness for us, for the government. But even in that situation, you can't remain in the oversight position. And so I didn't. It's very run of the mill to happen. There's paperwork for it, and then someone is the stand-in. If it happens in the U.S. Attorney's office, the first assistant becomes the acting U.S. attorney for that case. It's a matter of routine. If it happens here, the chief deputy would become, act as the oversight of that. It's routine.
Drew, this is Chad Oban. This is usually the part of the show where I make fun of Rob for failing to introduce me. But I did it again.
I get so excited to start asking the questions, I forget to introduce the show.
I'm actually going to give you a pass because this topic is so important. So, Drew, you're not only the current North Dakota Attorney General, but you're the former U.S. Attorney as well. So a couple questions on process, not specific to this case, but sort of what happens now? Like, how far are we away from trial? What happens if Ray pleads guilty? Does all the discovery just sort of go away? What is the process moving forward? And we did talk quite a bit about recusing, and we do have a Democrat U.S. Attorney appointee right now. Yeah. It's my understanding that Mac has recused himself from this case. So can you just talk about what this process looks like moving forward? What's the timeline?
Well, first I'll address Mac. Mac is a professional colleague of mine, but we've known each other a long, long time. And I just gave him my perspective on the matter before he'd been briefed on it at all after he became U.S. attorney. And my advice to him was to do that, to recuse himself. There's no allegation against Mac Schneider. It would be sort of like the example I just gave you. Like it would be too close to it. He's part of the same delegation from Grand Forks, worked closely with several of the people who had been mentioned in the investigation. And I think Mac, this is my word, not his. I think he saw it as a no-brainer. He recused himself because that's the professional thing to do in that regard. So he did that. So Jennifer Poole is the acting United States attorney on that case. It's simple, straightforward. It was seamless. So what happens next? Okay, so Ray Holmberg. By the way, everyone mentions that he was a former legislator. from my perspective, into this matter of more moment and consequence, he's a former educator, decades-long educator, guidance counselor in the Grand Forks public school system. That raises very, very serious alarms for obvious reasons. And so what happens next, now that he's been arrested earlier this week, they have set a trial date, but that won't be the trial date. It's December 5th. That won't be the trial date. There's no way. The volume of discovery, the volume of reports and information and stuff that is now being turned over to his lawyer. He has a very capable defense attorney. Mark Fries is very experienced. He's very capable. And Mr. Fries will be given all of that information. We'll start the process of going through and assessing the government's case against his client. And that's going to take some time. Like I say, it is a voluminous, and I would add growing file of discovery in this matter. And another thing that I've been talking about this week is that I firmly believe, I've been in and out of law enforcement for 30 years, both as U.S. attorney twice, and I was a prosecutor in Philly for 5 years before I came home to North Dakota. And cases like this, oftentimes there are witnesses who have not yet come forward. There are also, in cases like this, I'm speaking generally, there are oftentimes witnesses who on the front end don't feel comfortable being as forthright as they maybe become comfortable when they realize, the authorities are taking these matters seriously. I as a witness can be protected, will be protected. No one will be able to, lash out at me or what have you. And so if there are people out there who have additional information on this matter, who or people maybe who have already become involved because they've been questioned by law enforcement and they know that there's maybe some more that they should come forward with and be forthright with, I strongly urge them to call. If you don't mind, I'll give the phone numbers.
I have them here. BCI at 701-328-5500. Or your press release also suggested the Homeland Security Investigations tip line at 866-347-2423. That's BCI 701-328-5500. Homeland Security 866-347-2423.
Thank you. Yes,
Drew. Sorry.
Can I just quick follow up? So if Ray Holmberg's 79 years old, if he decides tomorrow to plead guilty, what happens to all that discovery? What happens? Is that become public record, or does it just go away?
It's not. It's never going away. Never going away. Everything in our custody is subject to open records. Once this matter is closed with finality, every bit of it is subject to open records, unless some exception can come out of there. Again, I think anybody who's followed me across my years in public office knows that we are open and candid about information and forthright about. I'm not looking for reasons to hold things back ever. Those are public matters, and even under the Freedom of Information laws under the federal system, it's a little more of an arduous journey to get the documents. But no, those become public documents when a case is through to fidelity, appeals, and everything is complete. And also, I would say, Chad, if there were, in any case, if there's a guilty plea, when the person comes in to change his or her plea from not guilty to guilty, they don't just, that's not the end of it. It's not just, I plead guilty, we'll go on and get my sentence. No. The government puts in a very detailed fact basis so that the judge can be comfortable with the idea that this person has been confronted with the evidence against them. This is the evidence against them, and there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of each element of every offense, and only then can a judge accept a guilty plea. So those are lengthy hearings, and if something like that were to happen in this case or similar cases, that's what happens. Federal court is a little tough to follow though, because there are no cameras in federal court. So it's, sometimes there's a sketch artist, maybe, once every 5 years, but I mean, it's really reporters going in there and reporting back, and there's no tape recordings or anything like that. So that's why you don't hear a lot out of federal court sometimes. And when I was U.S. attorney, we talked a lot publicly about our case, and I get criticized by one person in the media in particular, which I always thought was funny, criticizing me for coming out and talking about the cases going on in federal court. And this person worked for a news organization, but okay, I think this makes it seem kind of personal, right? But that's advice I gave to my successor too. Mac is an excellent communicator, and and the public pays their salaries. I always said that they need to know how it's going in there, and I know for sure that they'll hear and should hear. I've heard Mac a couple times. That's a part of the job. It's important, and Mac happens to be an excellent communicator. He's good at it. So that's sometimes the only window people have into the federal court is to hearing from the U.S. attorney and sometimes some witnesses, and then reporters going in and following it. But that's a really long answer to your question, Chad, but it's a good question because there will be an airing of the facts in this case. That is the blunt answer. There will be one way or the other.
I want to ask a question from a political perspective. And I know, I mean, our first priority here is justice, regardless of politics. But there's an issue here where, we have a political process that elects people like Ray Holmberg, that elects people like Drew Wrigley. And Drew, as a Republican, when we're looking at some of this stuff, my first question was about how your predecessor handled this case. We also have the fact that your predecessor emails, as well as those of his deputy, were deleted. That continues to cast a shadow over all this stuff. If for no other reason, we don't know what was in there. We have, this is a Republican state senator. There's question about if he abused his privileges, abused taxpayer resources to travel. Were taxpayer resources used in the furtherance of his crimes? There's a lot going on in Republican, both nationally, but specifically here in North Dakota. As an elected Republican, how do you feel about all this, how all this stuff is reflecting on your party right now?
Do you know what I love most about my job? What I love most about my job is that I don't even feel like I'm in politics. Legitimately do not feel like I'm in politics. I don't care about the politics of people that work here, that I interview for jobs. It feels very much like when I was a United States attorney that I had that privilege. It doesn't feel like politics. We are here to do justice, to seek and to do justice. I'm a conservative person. That would have a lot of consequence, I suppose, if I was an elected state senator making policy up the hallway. But I'm here as a law enforcement person in some realms of this office. I'm here as a regulatory person. We are here to litigate matters on behalf of the state of North Dakota. We take it seriously. And so looking at these, I saw your column the other day, Rob, and you read through some of this stuff, and I happen to know in both parties, when something comes up, there's vastly more well-intentioned, hardworking people that just care about policy. On the Democrat side, Republican side, that's just true. We are called, though, to comment on these matters. We're called to. I didn't come here to make things look better or worse for somebody. I've got a level of frustration sometimes with some of the things that we point out as we go along. It can get kind of frustrating, and sometimes people's outside of the office, their response like, well, you could have said it this way or you could have done it that way. And it's like, I told someone, we had a division director meeting one day, and we were talking about some of these very matters. And I just, maybe I got a little frustrated. I said, I did not seek this job to make friends. I sought it because I feel like it's been the privilege of my lifetime professionally to work in this arena, both as a United States attorney, as a DA before that, and in this. And I said, I did not seek this job to make friends. And there's kind of a quiet pause in the room. Actually, one of my division directors said, well, you're doing a hell of a job.
Yeah. Which
I appreciated the comic relief, but it sounds hokey. It really does. But we, in this office, I have roughly 270 people that are the Attorney General's office. It's not just the Attorney General sitting in this office, all those people. And we're here to do justice and seek it out. So I read that story. I saw it. Those are troubling circumstances. Troubling circumstances happen. We all need grace, and we're all called to give grace. But you know what else it takes? Candid discussions about what is happening, what are the implications of it, and and what's the response to it. I mean, it's quite a time politically in this country, and nobody needs my political science perspective on it. But it is funny, every time someone gets mad around here these days, it's like, we're going to find someone to primary him, or we got to get somebody to, cut that person off with the kneecaps. It's like, I have an idea. Just why don't you argue your way out of it? Why don't you take on politics and have an actual discussion? I had some complaints during the session about one day I had this bill of some importance. We had gathered some real steam. It was a violent crime provision, and we got overwhelming support in the Senate. Went over to the House. I went to a hearing one day, and they're all in there. Everybody's talking nice to the Attorney General, and everybody's doing what they do and listening and asking me questions. Then I left and I went to the Industrial Commission, and they promptly gutted my provision while I was out of the room. And then I talked about it on the air, and then they got mad at the Attorney General for weaponizing. I'm like, weaponizing? You're in politics. I'm facilitating. I'm telling people what you did under the fall of night when I walked out of the room, and what you gave me the courtesy, I guess, to not be present for the gutting. And then they were angry. These 5 legislators angry at me because I had the audacity to tell people what they had done. I'm like, well, I don't know. That seems like if you're in politics, you're voting the way you believe, right? So we should tell people what you're doing. So I'm going to book that one thing. It'll be really quick. The real thing is that is me speaking of some of the frustrations. The vast majority of people, though, are still here for good reasons. They're working on things, both sides of the aisle. They're working on things that they really want to try to shape policy. And I have to remind myself of that when I get a little frustrated, because the vast majority of people they're working on behalf of North Dakota, both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Drew, there's been reporting from both the Forum and KFGO about the Holmberg travel and who might have paid for that funding. And it seems like it's pretty clear that at least some of the travel was funded through the Global Bridges program, which is state-funded money that then works its way through the School Boards Association, the DPI, to Germany, or some other variation of that trail of money. Is there anything that the AG's office is going to do to look into that state appropriation? And it does seem the way that program was set up through the School Boards Association does seem a little bit sketchy, frankly, sort of looking at it now, particularly if the crimes Holmberg is alleged to participated in were part of this travel. But is there what next with that program and that appropriations? These are state dollars that are being spent. And it sounds to me like the current leadership of North Dakota School Boards Association is being completely transparent, sharing all the information and doing a tremendous job. But what next with that state appropriation?
Well, I view our job in this as, one of the key investigative agencies on that particular matter. Our job is to be shedding as much light as possible on it so the policymakers can make some of those choices. And that process has been going on robustly this week because parts of that investigation have been discussed by some people with knowledge about it, and they're allowed to, and they did. And they're permitted to do that. And we're just going to continue that process right on through. Back to your previous question, right on through when there's a full airing of this matter, whether in a guilty plea or a trial of some kind, or whatever happens down the road. And you've mentioned, Chad, and I will too, and remind people, indictments are just allegations. They're not themselves proof of anything. Ray Holmberg is entitled to the presumption of innocence, and he has it. And I'm the first to say that, and I know you've said it too. And we got to remind everybody about that. There's no rush to judgment about it. This case has been built on evidence, and the other side will have an opportunity to rebut that and build their case too. So, there's going to be a robust discussion. I can tell you internally here, I found out some stuff about the granting process as it is. And yesterday morning had a meeting that we've already started the process internally to be looking at that, saying, shouldn't there be an overlay that applies to every grant? Like, these legal provisions apply to every grant. It's transparency, competitive nature of how you put it out. It is illegal to legislate through to a grantee eventually without a competitive process along the way. The anti-gifting clause, it's plain as day. But yet I'm told this happens somewhat routinely, and I said, you know what, we're gonna do something about that.
Little Birdley told me that they routinely pass multi-issue bills too. So I don't know. Yeah. It seems like we need some updates maybe down at the legislature.
We're gonna engage the legislature on that process though, Chad. We are right now, and we're starting out by surveying other states and what do they have is just sort of like, here's your 3 pages of what you have to have for every grant that the legislature passes. A competitive process, transparency, accountability, whatever you want to be in there. And I'll bet you anything that we have strong legislative support for that in the next session. I'll bet we do, because they'll realize the time has come for that.
All right, who's ready to talk about Facebook? Should we actually hit
I wish they hadn't changed their name, because I still have never had. I'm the last person on earth. I've never had a Facebook account, and and then they changed it to Meta, and it's not catchy like Facebook is and Instagram, but nevertheless, the process is the same, and we were happy to join in this lawsuit. There are many of these national lawsuits that are going on around the country on a variety of topics, and we don't join them all. We look in to see if North Dakota has an interest, and we believe that North Dakota does, along with the rest of the country. It's an emerging suit, and we're going to stay in it as long as it's focused on just a responsible approach to not stamping out a perfectly legal business, but the practices have come significantly into question. And the harms we allege are known to Meta. They recognize the harms to young people. In fact, the allegations are that they have, in fact, contrived to leverage young people's propensities in some regards, and leverage those for financial gain, seeking to get young people to be addicted to the scrolling function and other components of again, I've never had a Facebook account, so I'll just go along with Instagram. My kids did convince me to get an Instagram account a couple of years ago. And in our family, we consider Instagram, it's fun. We communicate with each other. We'll send each other a meme or something. If you're sitting on a plane somewhere and sending stuff back and forth, we have some really funny family discussions. And I think a lot of people use these for good. But also, you're seeing a rise. My wife, Kathleen, is a guidance counselor. And she will join with the chorus of others who will tell you the upswing in mental health, anxiety, a whole host of challenges seems to go hand in glove with the dramatic increase in use of smartphones, but specifically social media. And this lawsuit is focused on Facebook, predominantly, specifically on Facebook and Instagram, because of their practices, which are troubling and should be concerning to parents. And the objective in the end is just a realization by the company, but it's sort of like I liken it to the big tobacco litigation.
I was just gonna ask if the tobacco lawsuits were a template for this.
My predecessor, a couple removed, Heidi Heitkamp, oversaw that in her time as Attorney General, and that was a monumental task for the Attorney General in that time period. But they took on, and what the country found out was that they weren't just providing these companies not just a product that was dangerous on its face, it was also constructed to be more and more and more addictive, to draw more people into it and get them in the clutches of addiction. So the similarities are real, and that's from my perspective as Attorney General of North Dakota, that's why we're in this. And we just want there to be an erection of some curbs, like construct some curbs, so that we can be comfortable that it's a safe product for the young people in this country, and that adults, the concerned adults in their lives, can help them put up those curbs.
Drew, why now? So Facebook's been around for a while. Meta's been around for it's the same thing. But I think some of the tactics that they've been using for a long time. So why the lawsuit now? Is there more information that's come to light, or?
Yeah, I think that there's more information that's come to light. There's more and more studies, and there's more folks like Kathleen Wrigley and others who are out there who are bringing this to the fore and recognizing this is no longer coincidental, and that we're seeing this, and also the use. I mean, it's exploded. The use of these products, of these social media platforms has exploded in recent years, and there's a growing sense around the country that it's something that needs to be dealt with. It doesn't need to be eradicated. It doesn't need to be put out to pasture completely. Not at all. There just need to be meaningful reforms of their algorithm and their product, but also the parents and young people too. We've all heard of these studies that have taken place where people have gone in and they've set up a fake bio. They say, I'm a 13-year-old male, and they go through and answer all the questions. And then you watch what gets flooded in, and the products, the information they flood out. And I don't know if you two are on Instagram, but I'm on there. If you go to my Instagram page where you look on the search area, you will find lots of Michael Jordan. And I'm not even a huge basketball fan, but I love Michael Jordan. So lots of Michael Jordan clip stuff, lots of, depending on the season, like water skiing wipeouts or snow skiing, and then tiny houses. I love the whole tiny house revolution. I think we're all going to be in tiny houses someday. And then also I like certain quotes. Okay, not to bore you with mine, but because I look at those things, that's what's on there. But once in a while, it wants me to do something else. It wants me to be like horrible car crashes or something. And big deal. Drew Wrigley had to see a horrible car crash. But I'm like, what is it that product goes in there? And then people talk about, for young people, often drug use, self-harm, body comparison stuff, things that are really detrimental when being forced in. And they are forced in because, I didn't tell them, like, I'm really interested in horrible car crashes, but it wants me to see, or motorcycle,
because it knows that it knows how other people maybe like you or that fit your demographic profile. It knows that it hooks them in and keeps them on the app longer. So it figures, even though he hasn't shown any interest in this, if we give him a hit of it, he's gonna keep going. All right. Well, it's
harmless. For the three of us, it'd be harmless. We're just like, I don't really give a rat's fanny about that. And I'm going to just go on and look at the stuff I want to look at. But for a young person who's being confronted with topics, subject matter, content that, maybe it grabs them and they go down some rabbit hole. But there's an explosion of not just obscene materials, but horrible pornography. And I'm not sitting here. People say, oh, well, here goes another Republican talking about pornography. No, folks. Child pornography, illegal pornography, like stuff that no one would, and the law does not support being out there, readily available to people on these platforms. And there's no, at the moment, meaningful way to keep that off the phones of kids. And that kind of stuff is scarring to kids. It is scarring. This is not the piety police here. These are real. And I think they cross party demographics. I think they're matters of concern for adults with either their own kids or young people that they're concerned about in their life. And we're going to our goal is to give people the tools to help young people navigate this and use this as a tool as opposed to another instrument. It's like why we have to give young people driver's tests before they can drive. And cars are great, except they're deadly. Instagram and social media has a use, but it also needs to have important curbs.
Well, North Dakota is going to be one of 33 states that are suing Meta, and we'll certainly watch how that comes out. Yeah. Drew, thank you so much for your time. We took a little extra, but you're always so generous with your time when we have you on. Certainly appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you both, and we'll see you up the path.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
All right, just finished our interview with Attorney General Drew Wrigley, who I feel wanted to say a lot more. I mean, he's a professional person, and there's an ongoing investigation here, and there are people involved in that. Obviously, Ray Holmberg, who have the presumption of innocence. So there's a lot he can't say without diminishing the cause of justice in these matters. But there was a lot going on in that interview. And I mean, one of the things is, I don't think we could ignore the fact that the person, at one point Drew said what, BCI was handling 80%, like the majority, had handled the majority of the investigation. And a lot of it went federal, I'm assuming because it had that international travel component. Yep. I feel like child pornography, because it's the internet, I'm assuming it crosses state lines. That creates a federal nexus. The feds are probably just better situated to prosecute that. But the state of North Dakota did a ton of work. And I think it's notable, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, that the predecessor in the Attorney General's office was Wayne Stenehjem, who was close personal friends with Ray Holmberg, longtime political allies, elected to the legislature from the same community. He was overseeing this case and did not recuse himself. And it sure sounds like when Drew came in, He had to kind of pluck it out of the pile with all the other cases and say, no, we got to get after this one. That is remarkable to me, Chad.
Yeah, and it's sort of hard to talk about this, right? With Wayne passing away, it's very clear to me that he most certainly should have recused himself.
I would like to hear him explain it. Like, why was it handled this way?
But Rob, you brought up the other thing that's sort of difficult here, and that's all the emails went away.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know if there's anything actually in these emails. There might have been nothing in these emails, but it gives a perception that there's something.
There's Schrodinger's emails now, because I don't know. I mean, we'll never get to open them unless somebody finds a backup somewhere that nobody knew existed. You know, I don't have any doubt that Drew did everything he could. His office did everything they could to get those emails out if they could, to find them. I don't have any doubts about that. But we're never going to know what's in those emails. They are going to be a question mark casting a shadow over this whole thing forever.
And Rob, we talked about these emails in connection with the Jason Doctor,
the building contract,
the building stuff.
Yeah.
We had the same conversation. We don't know what, there could have been stuff. Wayne could have been involved. Troy Seibel could have been involved. We don't know this, right? Because all the emails are gone. And now this Holmberg stuff, we don't know what's in there.
But we know
Brocker probably has an idea of what she deleted.
Well, because that's the thing. What we do have is we have Liz Brocker on the record in an email, and if I'm remembering right, the email was to ITD, or maybe it was somebody else in the AG's office. I don't know, but she said in an email, we need to do this because Wayne didn't get rid of anything, and we need to do it before the media gets a request in.
And again, we don't know if there was anything in there very well might have been
or if it was negative things, maybe it just would have been merely personally embarrassing for Wayne. Maybe he spent a lot of his time at the office shopping on Amazon or something that didn't reflect poor. Like, I don't know. Maybe it was relatively benign, or maybe it was friggin' horrendous. And he felt confident in doing it because guess who stands astride the open records law in our state? The Attorney General's office.
And I think the one thing and we talked a little bit about the funding for these trips, and that was in the forum, and KFGO reported on it. And it's amazing to me that some people talking about the program, Global Bridges, which, it's not Global Bridges' fault that this happened, or it's not the program's fault, but spent so much time defending the program and didn't demonize the alleged activities of Ray Holmberg. I mean, that feels like something we should all be able to do. Even if you've been friends with Ray Holmberg for a long time. After Ray resigned, I tweeted something about that. He was a great friend of education, public employees. And I had people send me private messages on Twitter that were like, whoa, you might want to be careful about saying anything nice about Ray. Well, people didn't know this stuff was going on. Even if you're friends with Ray Holmberg, you should be able to demonize what he's alleged to have done here. And I think it's also, Drew talked about the fact that the interviews will continue. People will continue to come forward with information.
He was still soliciting people to come forward.
Yeah.
We read the phone numbers.
Yeah. So I think this, if this goes to trial, I think it's going to be super interesting to see who is all involved in conversations and that kind of thing.
The other interesting thing, as someone, again, who works with North Dakota open records law a lot, is the fact that the state of North Dakota did so much of the investigation. And again, and I can't remember if Drew said it on air or if he said it during, he definitely said it. And if he didn't say it during the interview, I apologize. It was something he mentioned in passing, either before or after the interview. But he put the percentage, like the state of North Dakota had done like 80% of the investigation. Well, in the state of North Dakota, that's all going to be public record. I mean, there may be some, we got to take people's home addresses out or something here and there. But that means like 80% of this is going to end up in the public eye. And first of all, good. That's a good thing. But I'm trying to think of the tsunami that's going to be.
Yep.
What's in there?
Yeah. What's in there?
Who maybe didn't do anything criminal, but is going to look really, really bad.
Yeah, or who's been interviewed by the feds already. I'm surprised at the amount of references I've heard over the last week of, so-and-so talked to the feds, or so-and-so got to, stop by their office from the feds, that this investigation was much more thorough than I knew. I didn't know anything about what was going on. But who gets brought to the stand? Who's questioned about this stuff if it goes to trial? Yeah. And like Drew made the point, there's no cameras. And so it's people like you and reporters in that room who are reporting who's there. And I assume there's transcripts that come out and all that.
There's going to be filing. There's going to be filings. There's going to be a court transcript. There's obviously going to be reporting by people in the courtroom reporting on what happened. But I really think when it's over and we get a full look at, there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out in trial if it gets to a trial, and it may not. Maybe they'll plead. I have no idea. And Drew's right, by the way. He's Ray's got probably the top defense attorney in the state. Mark Freese is a friend of the show. He's come on frequently about all sorts of things, marijuana legalization, law enforcement issues. He's one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. So this is not going to be, this is going to be a very arduous process. But I kind of wanted to. I asked Drew the political question, and it's hard to ask that question because I didn't want to make it. I am not concerned about how prosecuting Ray Holmberg reflects on the Republican Party, vis-a-vis whether or not he should be that's not my point at all. My point is there's a lot of things that have been happening and I wrote the column about it earlier this week. There's a lot of things with Republicans where you look at, Will Gardner in 2018, winning the endorsement for Secretary of State at the convention. Turns out he's a window peeper. You have, some of the more recent stuff with the executive director of the North Dakota Republican Party having to resign after a week or 10 days because of horrendous posts on social media. You have a state representative, Brandon Pritchard, horrendous posts on social media. You have a group of the North Dakota Young Republicans where it's, current lawmakers, legislative candidates, district chairs, campaign managers, all in this group where they're doing white supremacist, jokes and homophobic jokes. You have that out there. You have the long history of lawmakers making just inappropriate and bigoted social media posts. You have the building scandal, starting in the Attorney General's office where an influential state lawmaker who also happened to be the treasurer of Wayne Stenehjem's 2016 gubernatorial campaign gets a sweetheart deal, right? Gets to first of all, find out that the Attorney General's office is looking for new office space, then go buy a building so that they can lease it to the Attorney General's office for that office space. And then it goes, however much it was, $1 million over budget or whatever that, I'm forgetting the dollar figure now, massively over budget, overpayments. You have that happening. You have the emails getting deleted. There's a point at which you look and say, maybe it's time for someone else to be in charge. About a year ago, I was using the word decadent to describe North Dakota Republicans. And I think I use that word because I think there's a feeling that from some of them, and I think Drew's right, there's a lot of good people in the Republican Party, don't get me wrong, but there is a feeling where there's just no consequences. I think there's a feeling that they could just kind of get away with anything.
So, Rob, the one that you didn't mention is the Luke Simons.
Yes.
At the state legislature. And I think two big points that when you're talking to Drew about this that really stick out to me. And one is, do we have a whole generation of Republicans who have grown up in the Donald Trump era who think that's the way politics is supposed to work?
I think you look at Brandon Pritchard, you look at Matt Heilman, you look at Cole Christensen. Those are all state lawmakers. I think those are all prime examples of young men who have grown up in the Trump era who think that's how you behave.
And I don't think that's a North Dakota specific thing either, right? I think that's a national thing. But the other point that you made is the people have to stand up to this behavior. Even if it's in their party, folks need to stand up. Why did Luke Simons go down? It's because Emily O'Brien and Brandy Pyle and some other legislators said, Rob Port said enough is enough, right? That this behavior is not acceptable. and they stood up to him. You know, when the Will Gardner, not alleged window peeper, there were people who like were saying, well, he was young. He was an adult who was, you know, when
he was early 20s, I think, mid 20s.
Yeah, he was an adult. And somehow that was okay behavior. Or even some of the stuff around Holmberg, where people are saying, wow, you know, he's an old man, you know, why don't we just let this go or whatever.
No.
Like, they have to stand up for this stuff. This is unacceptable behavior. And here's the deal. The Republicans are a big tent. We know that. They're a big tent. The vast majority of elected people in the state are Republicans. So you're going to have these issues, but they can't be acceptable. And take it a step further. Let's go to Washington. George Santos, right? You can't kick him out. It's not the Congress's job, but those type of behaviors, I mean, at least with George Santos, most Republicans in Congress are saying, I'm not going to kick him out. That's not my job. But what he did was terrible. Yeah. What he continues to do is terrible. Republicans have to stand up and say that stuff.
I think because there is kind of a gotcha game that we play in politics sometimes where, you know, we're asking Democrats in North Dakota about Anthony Weiner and former Congressman Anthony Weiner, who got caught sending pictures of his wiener to people. It's such a horrible thing. But I mean, I get it. Like North Dakota Democrats really don't have anything to do with that, right? Like, obviously that's bad behavior. Obviously good people are not condoning this. So I understand not liking that gotcha game. Right. But there is a point when it's North Dakota Republicans that it's happening to, then maybe it is incumbent on the governor to say something about it. Maybe it is incumbent on the attorney general or a public service commissioner or some of these other people who are in statewide office to say no. You know, and I'll tell you, Chad, I feel vindicated in some of this stuff. You have no idea how I have taken it on the chin the last few years, where I have set my sights on this stuff. I don't know that there's many people in North Dakota, including liberal commentators, who have spent more time criticizing the Republican Party in North Dakota than I have, or Republican officials or Republican figures in North Dakota than I have. I recognized this problem a long time ago, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. I think it's ridiculous. I don't want to make excuses for it. It's gross.
And it's not something that Democrats can fix for Republicans,
no.
Particularly with the imbalance in the state. It's not something where, well, why don't Democrats just run and beat these guys? Well, somebody needs to be educating the voters on this behavior, right? And you're doing a good job, but Republicans standing up against Republicans for this type of behavior, and often criminal behavior, right? I mean,
by the way, Republicans standing up to it would help in not, I mean, if you want to look at it through a partisan lens, I think Republicans standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, and we should show these people the exit in our party, helps inoculate them against Democrats starting to get ground. Now, that shouldn't, I mean, you should do it because you're a good person, and what these people are doing is wrong. You know, it shouldn't be a purely partisan motivation, but I mean, that's part of it.
But Rob, I mean, we both know it, that both sides are hypocrites, right? If a Democrat does it, maybe a Democrat says it's okay, but then the other guy does it and it's terrible, right? And so I think
hypocrisy abounds.
Yeah, a Democrat criticizing a Republican, I mean, that's easy to ignore. A Republican saying this is wrong behavior, it rings different. It has different stature, I think, in the voters' mind.
But I mean, you could look at like Mitt Romney and what he's tried to do. You look at what was it, Ken Buck, Congressman Ken Buck, who just retired, Colorado. Am I getting his name right? Congressman from Colorado.
Yeah, Ken Buck, and then you had him basically saying the election wasn't stolen. I don't want to be part of this group anymore that keeps saying that the election was stolen.
Yeah, like our party is organized around Donald Trump's lie about the 2020 election. I don't want to be a part of that. That takes integrity. That takes integrity to do that.
But it's also terrifying that Ken Buck, Tom Emmer, Kay Granger from Texas, these are all people who, in my history, these were people who were so conservative.
Right. Ken Buck was part of the original. Ken Buck was part of the original Tea Party
Yeah, and Tom Emmer, I remember when he ran for governor or Senate in Minnesota, it's like, this guy's nuts. He's so conservative. Now, that guy can't get elected because he's not conservative enough to be Speaker of the House.
And again, conservative, air quotes, is being defined as loyalty to the big lie. That's what it means to be conservative
is defined by being against freedom to marry who you want, and that you had to, and certifying that Joe Biden won the election.
I want to illustrate that point, because I just before the show I wrote a column, and so by the time people listen, the column's been published now as we've been recording, so people can find it now. But I wrote about that cop from Lake Park, Minnesota, who came to the Fargo Theater and was like, they wouldn't let me bring my gun in. He's off duty. He's on a date with his wife. He's like, well, I can take my gun anywhere. I don't know why they wouldn't. They don't. And his quote was, they say they respect law enforcement, but they must not trust law enforcement. And so I wrote a column about that. But I thought the public's reaction to it was different, because you had a lot of people, kind of thin blue line conservatives out there who are, back the blue, and we're going to bat. I saw on social media, we're going to the mattresses for this guy. And I'm thinking to myself, the conservative principle is the Fargo Theater has property rights. Isn't that a conservative principle? Or I mean, it's not an exclusively. I know there's plenty of Democrats that respect property rights too, but I mean, conservatives believe in property rights. We believe in gun rights, but we also believe in property rights. And if a private property owner doesn't want you to bring your firearm on their property, you have to respect their rights. I don't care if you are a cop, an off-duty cop. On-duty cop's a different matter, perhaps, but
right.
That's a different. So I look at that. It's like, well, the conservative position is, of course, this agent of the state, this armed agent of the state, should be able to ignore the property owner's wishes and bring it. That's a limited government conservative position now.
Yeah. It's funny, when I read the article, my two takeaways were, one is, who does this guy think he is, that the rules don't apply? He's not on job.
He is no different than some Karen live streaming herself on Facebook berating a Taco Bell worker for not putting enough cheese on the taco.
But the other piece that really got me is they were going to a David Sedaris show. If people aren't familiar with David Sedaris, he's about the furthest left person you're ever going to meet in your life, who I would imagine isn't a big fan of weapons at his shows. Yeah. And now I imagine this guy, maybe he didn't know who David Sedaris was, listening to David Sedaris and be like, what did my wife bring me to?
I actually got a nasty email from David Sedaris a long time ago. I forget even what I had written, something about one of the columns he wrote, because I didn't like it, because he's a far left guy, and he wrote something and I didn't like it, and he sent me this nasty email about how dare you, or something. Like, I was kind of surprised, like, you're Dave Sedaris, why the hell are you emailing me?
So my wife and I ran into, this is the most liberal thing ever, Aaron and I were in San Francisco, and we ran into David Sedaris out of Starbucks, and he's very shy and whatever, but he had just been in Bismarck. And when he was in Bismarck, there was a group of people that, speaking of snowflakes, were offended by some of the liberal stuff he was saying, and they left the show. Right. And so we ended up talking to him, and he was just like, who did these people think they were seeing? I mean, I was sort of toned down a little bit. So I just imagine this guy at the show like, oh, what did I get myself into here?
That is like a perpetual bone of contention with me, that now the quote unquote conservatives are these authoritarian bootlickers who are just all, let's bow down to Vladimir Putin, let's bow down to Donald Trump, let's let the cops do whatever they want. No, it's about, oh gosh. I mean, it's such a departure from what I believed in, what drew me to be a conservative in the first place. And now it's like, that makes me a rhino. I'm over here with Chad Oban and the liberals. Like,
well, and I keep thinking about this property tax debate, about eliminating property taxes, and thinking about, how is this conservative to centralize all decisions in Bismarck? That's the least conservative thing I've ever heard of in my life.
The conservative solution for this is to start a grassroots movement saying, go to your park district, go to your county commission, go to your school board, go to your city, and talk to them about your property taxes. And you're going to have to understand there's some give and take. You want your property taxes lower? Maybe you can't build the water park then.
But the last thing in the world is having a centralized government determining what local governments can and cannot do in terms of revenue is not conservative at all.
No, it is not.
You know what? We should teach classes on how to be a conservative.
We really should. Yeah. Rob, I'm sure they would all listen to us.
Yeah. I got a lot to do to teach these conservatives how to be conservatives.
Oh, well, I think from your perspective, it's like, could you guys be like the loyal opposition to us that you once were? Because I look at you, like you and I had some Donnybrooks back in the day. We still do occasionally when we ever get around to talking about policy instead of this endless ideological drama. You and I are on the opposite sides of most issues, most policy issues, most issues of decency and humanity. We're very much on the same side. But in terms of policy, taxes and regulations and stuff, we have very different viewpoints. And yet, for some reason, you and I are on the same side because, like, the ascendant political movement are like book banners. And I mean, you make a lot of common enemies. Like, I'm very limited government and I want low taxes and small government. And I'm very skeptical of law enforcement power. I think they're a necessary evil and all of those things. But it's like, if you and I are up against book banners, it's like, well, I guess we're on the same side now.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. It's an upside down world that we're living in.
It really is. So there's going to be, this Holmberg thing is going to be story of this year, story of next year. I mean, it's going to be with us for a while. I think it's going to cast a shadow over next year's elections for reasons that, I can't responsibly talk about publicly yet. But I mean, I really think that there is a good reason for North Dakota voters, and I say this with no enthusiasm at all, for electing Democrats to office.
I think one of
there is a good reason to wonder if North Dakota Republicans haven't had power too long.
I think one of the interesting things in sort of watching this Holmberg thing play out in the press is talking to non-politicos about it, and sort of it's a big deal, right? But people listening to this show probably understand how big of a deal Ray Holmberg was in terms of running the legislature and involved in everything. It's amazing when I sit down and talk to people. It's like, this isn't just a state senator. This is Ray Holmberg. I mean, he's been controlling the funding in the state for decades.
It's kind of like in the beginning of House of Cards, where Kevin Spacey is kind of like, he's House Majority Whip, and he's kind of explaining he's the plumber, right? Ray Holmberg was the plumber. He had an outsized influence over rubber meets the road policy for someone who most people probably don't know in the state outside of his legislative district.
And had an credible ability to get things done without having to do it while chairing the appropriations.
But for the stuff, for a long time before I knew this stuff, like when I first got involved in politics 20 years ago, and I was writing about the appropriations process and the budget process for the same time, Ray Holmberg was a help. Ray Holmberg was very open with me. I respected him a lot. He was very, very good at his job in many ways. And to the fact that one of my stories this week, I spoke with Senator Brad Beckedahl, who is now the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he talked about how even amidst all this, he has had conversations with Ray Holmberg about, how did you run this committee? Ray was that central to the process in Bismarck.
Well, it had been in that role for so long. Who else is Brad going to call?
Right. By the way, that is not me being critical of Senator Beckedahl at all. I understand why he made the call. Right. He's just trying to figure out how to do his job. So, that's not me being critical. That's just an illustration of how influential this person was.
And for how long?
Yeah.
And for so long. Yeah.
Remarkable stuff. Well, that's it for this show, which I feel like is a very big show. And I feel like some of the things our Attorney General said are going to be pretty newsworthy once we get this published. But a lot going on. We'll have more shows next week, and I'll book them when I get to them. That's what I always say. I don't know why. I feel like I should promote next week's show. I also don't know what I'm doing on next week's show. Maybe I should just shut up about it. So
actually, I think, Rob, lesson learned today. You booked Drew Wrigley a week in advance to talk about Meta, and I think we talked about it for 47 seconds.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us wanted to be talking about it while we were.
Well, we got overtaken by events, and that happens in the news business sometimes. But we're going to end this show here. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.